Hey, I'm catiewahwah, and it's time for January's most anticipated. 2017 is starting off right with a bumper crop of exciting new releases, and I've done my best to round up some particularly intriguing ones, so let's get straight into the music. First up is the debut album from Sundara, Youth is Only Ever Fun in Retrospect. Sundara are an indie band from Reading, and their single Olympia channels pure Springsteen with a British inflection. It's a really interesting musical perspective, and it's so easy to get lost in their riffs. Their name comes from Sanskrit, so Sundara meaning beautiful or noble, plus Karma. I've had a chance to listen to it a couple of times. It doesn't disappoint. Next up, the Xaxis are back with their third album, I See You.
My own heart, just to believe.
I think I've been excited about this album for about a year. I think I first mentioned it in a live stream at the end of 2015. I See You is the Xaxis' latest album since their 2012 Coexist, and I feel like in those intervening 5 years, their style has evolved so much. I loved Jamie xx's solo album In Colour, and apparently this record has had a huge influence on I See You, so I'm really fascinated to hear how that manifests. I also bought the 7-inch single for On Hold, and it's such a beautiful track. I feel like the vocals are clearer, or maybe just slightly less buried on this single than they have been in their previous music, and Romy's vocals reminded me of hers on Loud Places on In Colour. I love the artwork on this. It's just this completely reflective surface, so you can probably actually just see my camera and like the rest of my room right now. The LP artwork is similar to this, and then it's really cool because on the digital version it's with the band kind of standing over it as if they're looking down on it and then being reflected up, which I thought was a really cool idea, seeing as they can't have a reflective surface on a computer screen. I'll be hosting a live stream listening party for this album on Friday the 13th. Sangeeta and I are going to be listening through track by track and giving our thoughts on each one as we go along. And of course, you'll be able to join us in the chat and tell us exactly what you think as well. Link will be in the description. Now it's time for a Polish-inspired album, The Flaming Lips' Oczy Mlody. It's so weird to think that this is The Flaming Lips' 15th album. Like, wow. The title comes from a Polish phrase meaning eyes of the young. I was quite curious about the title, and I found a video where lead singer Wayne Coyne explains the logic behind it. He basically said that they heard this word and they thought it sounded cool, and then they found out what it meant, which was eyes of the young, and they liked that concept as well. But they didn't want to translate it into English because they felt like it lost something in the translation. Like the English phrase didn't work as well, but rather they liked the idea that that phrase, Oczy Mlody, meant eyes of the young. It's kind of a difficult idea to explain, but I think I get it. I think it's like when people prefer to say c'est la vie, even though everyone knows what that means in English. It just sort of sounds better in French. The Flaming Lips debuted music from this album in October in quite an interesting choice of focus group. They actually played it in a yoga studio in Oklahoma City during the classes. From what they've released so far, this seems like a slightly more abstract album. There's more focus on layering sonic textures and creating these gorgeous soundscapes. I also noticed that the cover art typography looks a lot like the title for a book that I'm reading at the moment called The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by Tom Wolfe. I got it here just like for a little comparison. Now that could just be me, but if that similarity is intentional, then it opens up so many fascinating possibilities for this album. I also wanted to mention that Oczy Mlody is getting pressed on a double LP with orange and lilac vinyl. Very electro pastel. Preparing for the end of the world. How about Cory Glazer's latest, Apocalipstick?
She's a wild one. She's a wild one next to me.
Cory Glazer are a Californian punk rock band led by Clementine Creevy, and this is their second LP. Aside from Creevy, the lineup has completely changed from their first album, although it sounds like they're all working really well together on this. It's guitar heavy, fiercely feminist, and has some really great lyrics. For this album, the band worked with Joe Ciccarelli, who's also worked with the White Stripes, the Shins, the Strokes, and Carlos de la Garza, who's worked with Bleached, and Tegan and Sara. So that's some pretty decent production experience there. The artwork reminds me a bit of He-Man, or maybe even heavy metal? I'd love to know what inspired it. It's also being released on vinyl and cassette. Now this seems to be a growing trend, and I think it's quite cool. Anything lo-fi, punk can sound amazing on cassette. It's also usually the cheapest format, even cheaper than a digital version of the album. And I just think that makes music so much more accessible. If the most important parts of your album are the message and the melody, then sometimes you can compromise that like super audiophile quality and you still get a really great experience. Next up is Shy Girls with his debut album, Salt. Shy Girls is the project of Dan Vidmar, who's based in Portland, Oregon. This is an R&B record, although I've also seen it referred to as PB R&B, I guess because it's a hipster version. The single, Trivial Motion, has an intoxicating feel and pace and weaves in these really interesting electronic influences as well. It's interesting how R&B is evolving to meld with and encompass so many other influences, although it's definitely a tricky balance to strike. I think Shy Girls manages that, and I'm really excited to see what this album has to offer. Moving on to a bit of indie rock, it's Menace Beach with their second album, Lemon Memory. Menace Beach are from Leeds, and they're an indie rock band whose style draws heavily from the 90s alternative scene. There's a lot of distortion, a general artsy feel to it. I'd even go so far as to call them shoegaze. They remind me of bands like The Breeders, with the vocals calling out from where they lie buried under the effects. The single Give Blood is a nice little introduction to them, and will probably also have you double checking that you haven't accidentally time traveled. If you're in the mood for some folk this month, you couldn't do much better than Julie Byrne's second album, Not Even Happiness. Byrne creates gorgeously melodic, mournful folk, and this album specifically is a nomadic album centering around travel and Byrne's many homes. Her label has a really nice description for it as well, as being about recollections of bustling roadside diners, the stars over the high desert, the aching weariness of change, the wildflowers of the California coast, and the irresolvable mysteries of love. Byrne has an incredible voice, and she harmonizes beautifully with the instruments, creating these very atmospheric singles, so I'm excited to see how that follows through on the rest of the album. I also found out that Byrne is currently based in New York City, where she moonlights as an urban park ranger in Central Park. I really hope that's true. You can just imagine walking through the park one day and hearing this beautiful voice weaving through the trees. And now for something completely different. It's Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes with Modern Ruin. Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes are an English hardcore punk band, and Modern Ruin is their second studio album. Frank Carter was previously the frontman of Gallows and Pure Love, although this project veers far closer to the hardcore of Gallows. Singles like Wildflowers are refreshingly harsh, focusing on pure cathartic emotion and surprisingly precise harmonies. Modern Ruin is also getting several colored vinyl editions, including Ghost Green, Crystal Clear, and my personal favorite, Blood, Red and Milk, which is split red and white. I feel like they missed a trick not calling it Blood and Bone, but I'm still looking forward to it. Next up on the list, it's Alison Crutchfield's debut, Tourist in This Town.
I get off the mattress on the floor.
You may know Alison Crutchfield from her band Swearin', or even from her earlier projects like P.S. Eliot, that she formed with her twin sister Katie, aka Waxahachie. She's originally from Alabama, and previously she's had more of an indie rock style, but on this project she's moved more towards using synths. She worked on the album in Philadelphia with Jeff Ziegler, and apparently it was his huge synthesizer collection and expertise that really drew her to working with him. The result is a shimmering indie electronic sound on single Dean's Room, which powers through a rocketing pace. I'm hoping for a similar sound on the rest of the LP. Finally, Kalani is releasing her debut LP at the end of this month, Sweet, Sexy, Savage.
I need you to give me your time.
Kalani is a really exciting artist. She's an R&B singer-songwriter who cites her influences as Lauryn Hill, Erykah Badu, and Jill Scott. She writes all of her own material and has had a lot of success with the 2 mixtapes that she's released so far, Cloud 19 and You Should Be Here. She was also featured on Zayn's album on the track Wrong, and you may have already heard her on the Suicide Squad soundtrack with her song Gangster. It was one of the only songs that actually fitted the story. It perfectly sums up the relationship between Harley Quinn and the Joker. Every single I've heard from this album so far has been brilliant, so I'm really excited to hear the whole thing. Well, that's it for January's most anticipated. But now I want to know, which albums are you excited about this month? If I left anyone out who you think should definitely be in this list, then please let me know in the comments. And if you listen to any of these albums, I'd love to hear your thoughts throughout the month. Like always, I've made YouTube and Spotify playlists featuring a single from every album mentioned. All of those links will be in the description. If you're not already and you'd like to be, then why not subscribe? If you turn on notifications, you'll get an alert whenever I post a new video or if I start live streaming. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!